Regarding Men, number 17, Men's Suicide, an Epidemic of Indifference. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is number 17 of Regarding Men, Sweet 17, and today we're going to talk about suicide, and we're going to talk about suicide, men, and gynocentrism, because really the three are interconnected in so many different ways. You know, if you look at history, what you find is that the ratio of male to female suicides, that is about 4 males for every 1 female, it goes back a long way. Not just to 1960, not just to 1900, but back in the middle of the 19th century, that ratio was still there. So really, we can't blame feminism for this one. We could, but we'll probably hold off a little bit. But what is it that's going on? And I think, you know, the biggest culprit is probably gynocentrism. And a number of other factors that we're going to talk about today, you know, like the way men heal. Men tend to heal differently. They tend to heal through action rather than through talking. So what does that do? It's fascinating. What it does is when women need to heal, they talk, they interact, and they find someone who will listen. And that person says, oh my God, she's suicidal. Yanks them to the emergency room, right? But when you heal through action, you don't get that kind of connection. You pull back to yourself. And when you do that, you lose that personal connection for people knowing something's going on with you to yank you to the emergency room. And there's all kinds of factors involved. You know, dependency is another one. And men are forced into being independent. We'll talk about why that is, but we're literally forced into being independent. And when you're forced into independence, guess what? You're not going to tell anybody you're suicidal, because that means you're dependent and you're not independent anymore. There's something wrong with you. Anyway, those are just 3 right off the bat, Paul and Janice. Where do we go from here? Mm-hmm. Suicide and men.
Yeah, well, who's going?
Go ahead, Janice. I can wait.
I was just going to say that I think, you know, if there's one area that one had to choose where you really do see gynocentrism so strongly in action, it is discussions of suicide. Because if I weren't interested specifically in men's issues and reading things about men's issues, and I was just glancing at headlines or even reading whole articles over the last couple of years about suicide, I would be under the distinct impression that suicide is a gendered issue and that it's gendered female, because there are so many articles out there that talk about how the rate of female suicide is on the rise, how this is something extremely concerning, how, you know, the numbers of women who have killed themselves has gone up 14%, you know, over the last 5 years, whereas male suicide has gone up only 6%, that kind of thing. It's just remarkable. And even if you read it with an eye to what we know about how news stories hide the reality of male suffering, you could still miss it. Many of these articles, like, they don't exactly lie, but, well, they certainly lie by omission, I would say, if not by commission. Sometimes there was an article, for instance, probably a lot of people saw last summer in the always politically correct Washington Post. And it was talking about how suicide was going up in general across the United States. And you know, it talked about how men have historically committed suicide more frequently than women. It did say that. But one of the experts who were being interviewed said, got the exact quote, the expert said, historically, men had higher death rates than women. And then he went on to say, that's equalizing. Not because men are committing suicide less, but because women are doing it more. And that is very, very troublesome. So right. You hear that, you know, you think equalizing. Well, what does that mean? That means that women are now committing suicide at about equal rates to men. But of course, it doesn't mean that at all. It means that rather than men accounting for 80% of suicides, they now account for, I think, something like 78%. I don't know if that's the exact, or I've seen 77% sometimes too. But still, the overwhelming majority of suicides remain committed by men. But you absolutely would not know that from reading an article like this Washington Post. You see nothing about how, the fact that 77% of suicides are male is very, very alarming and very, very disturbing. You see the fact that the women's rate has gone up by this very small fraction. And of course, that is a tragedy. I mean, we don't want anyone to be killing themselves. Right. But it's such a misrepresentation to pretend that women are the ones that we should be concerned about solely, rather than the overwhelming majority of men. So it really is, it's stunning, just absolutely stunning the way in which men and boys too. I read something about teen suicide not very long ago that kept talking about teens and how 1 in 5 teens has considered suicide. This was a Canadian study. A lot of concern about that, kept mentioning teens. The only time it was gendered, 2 times, once to say that girls were 4 times more likely to contemplate, to actually fantasize about how they would commit suicide, and that girls were 4 times, more than 4 times more likely to have body issues, which were predictors of suicidality. Now, if you had no mention of boys, so unless you knew the actual facts of the matter, you would be convinced that girls were actually committing suicide at 4 times the rate of boys, when of course, as we know, it's pretty much the exact opposite.
Yes.
But it's just amazing.
One of the things that is confounding about this problem is that we may never actually get any seriously legitimate scholarly investigation into the phenomena of male suicide. There is too much gynocentrism in the psychological establishment to ever allow that to happen. This is why you hear over and over again, and I've heard it from mental health professionals when I've brought up the subject of suicide in men, the immediate, almost like knee-jerk reaction to hearing that there's a suicide problem with men is, wait a minute, women try to kill themselves more than men. They attempt suicide more than, and I mean, I'm talking, this is coming from PhD level psychologists and psychiatrists with medical degrees, and this instant knee-jerk reaction, well, wait a minute, girls or women try to kill themselves more. And I got so frustrated with it, I began asking people when I heard that, well, what does that mean? Does it mean they're incompetent? That they attempt suicide and they can't pull it off? Or does it mean that actually dead men are less important to you than living women?
Yeah.
So which is it? But you can't, it's almost impossible to get people to budge. And let me give you an idea of the magnitude of this problem. We have a counter in the sidebar of ABFM. I note that worldwide, on average, a man kills himself every 20 seconds. Every 20 seconds, that's 3 per minute, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you look at that counter right now on ABFM, the count since ABFM was founded 10 years ago in 2009 is 11,542,429 men have killed themselves in that time. These are Holocaust level numbers.
Double.
And yet you can't even begin to talk about it in this culture without somebody being afraid that you're not playing the zero-sum game correctly, and you're robbing women of their time for people to pay attention to them. Meanwhile, men are literally dropping like flies every 22nd, and we won't even study the problem. Mm-hmm. And then what little we get from the psychological establishment, the worst part of it for me, is they totally screw up the narrative about what men's suicide is about. And again, I've got to admit, I'm dealing in some conjecture here because I can't find good research on male suicide. But what you hear from feminist scholars about male suicide is that we teach boys to repress their feelings, and they don't articulate their sadness well enough to please, idiotic feminist therapists who can only measure a person's progress by how they cry for them. which is an absolutely moronic way to measure the progress of men. Peter Wright and I worked together on a book. It also happens to be in the sidebar of ABFM, Red Pill Psychology, and it's Psychology for Men in a Gynocentric World. And the ideas that we put out in there is that to work with men in a good therapeutic environment, the therapist needs to get off their ass. They need to be willing to walk with clients, to do things with them, to become a part of their active life. And that is, yes, that puts a bigger demand on the therapist. It probably means less per hour on average in order to work with men. God forbid that somebody make a little bit less money in the name of delivering good therapy. But Tom was absolutely right. Men heal working side by side with each other. I've said this 100 times, I'll say it again. Two men can be in a bass boat, one of them's gone through a divorce, his heart's broken, his whole world is destroyed, and he can get healing sitting in that boat without 10 words passing between the two of them. Just the presence of the other male who's aware of the circumstances, just the fact that he's not alone, because this is how men connect. Yes. This is how we reach each other. And therapists want a nice clinical environment with a box of tissue on the side table by the chair so that he can reach and grab one and daub his tears when it comes to the appropriate moment. That is a crazy, crazy wrong way to look at therapy for men. So, I mean, that's part of my 2 cents on this.
What the guy in the bass boat is doing is he's honoring his buddy's independence. And this is what men are literally forced into, is this whole idea of being completely independent. And if we show ourselves to not be independent, then we get thrown into this precarious manhood piece, which is another part of all this, is that, the researchers know that men and boys, when they hit puberty, go into this thing called precarious manhood, which means that they are judged continually on whether they are, quote, a man or not. Girls, when they go through puberty, do not have judgment. They're assumed that they are a woman as soon as she goes through puberty. They have no such judgment. They have no concept of the kinds of judgments that men get put through in order to push this independent idea. Then think about it, Paul. Once these guys when big boys don't cry, all the bullshit, but then we get this to be independent as we can, to look good, and then you go into therapy, and what do they ask you to do?
To cry.
Do the opposite. I want you to become dependent just for me, become dependent. That's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. It's like you can't ask someone to completely turn their identity around all of a sudden just so that you can be like someone else. Fuck that. It's just crazy. And this is what happens when, therapy is built for women. It's built for women and girls where they're going to talk about it. The whole Shelly Taylor thing where she found that women, when they're stressed, go towards interaction. They go towards interacting with each other. Men, when they're stressed, move towards action or solitude. And you can't expect someone who's really good at solitude and action to just all of a sudden turn around and become this interactor. But that's what women expect and therapists expect, because that's the way.
And the APA is even sickly pushing for this. This is where we get the Gillette commercials and all this stuff, because the APA is pushing a fraudulent narrative about the nature of men, and they have replaced good psychological knowledge with politics, with sexual politics, in order to please therapists. Yes. And so they're not talking about, one of the things that men kill themselves over, there's a number of reasons. Many of them are tied to a diminishment in their role as a protector and a provider. Men kill themselves during hard economic times. They can't face the shame of not being able to support their families or their wives.
Yes.
It isn't because they don't cry. It isn't because they're defective women who need to shed tears for a pathogenic therapist who is sitting there expecting their issues to be fulfilled by a client. When men are breaking down, the way we reach them is to help them become productive again, to take that path, because that will resolve their issues in a lot of cases. And it just blows my mind that we have a psychological establishment now that is ignoring all of this, and intentionally ignoring.
Yes.
It's almost as though they're happy contributing to the suicide rate. And I know that seems like an extreme thing to say, and I'm sure that a lot of this is just based in ignorance and ideological bias.
And gynocentrism.
But the fact is, the narrative that the American Psychological Association pushes is damaging to men. It will contribute to suicide, and people in that profession, shame on them for not speaking out about this anymore. Absolute shame on them.
Completely ignorant. They're completely ignorant of the man's nature, the way he does things. And until the psychological community can start to understand the way men really are and the way men heal, there's not going to be much help for them. Men know they're not going to get help in therapy. That's not what they're looking for. What they're looking for is someone who can honor their capacity to feel good about themselves, to see their own worth in being men. And that's when someone's suicidal, they feel helpless and hopeless, and they see themselves as a piece of shit. That my family's going to feel better if I was just die. That's literally what the suicidal mind starts to think, is that I'll help them by dying. And so their own sense of worth is completely shot. Until we can help men to understand that they have worth just in being, we're going to miss the boat. We're going to miss the boat. Women, on the other hand, they feel better when they know someone is caring for them. And that's what therapy does. Oh, I care for you, which helps them feel worthy in their own way. Anyway, so we're leaving men out in the cold in a lot of ways. And, I wish that I could connect that with the suicide rates, but I can't, because the suicide rates have been pretty bad for hundreds of years. It's not something that's brand new. It's not because of feminism or the idiots in psychology. It's gynocentrism, it's been going on for a long time. Mm-hmm. But, the whole independence thing is so critical. There was this guy that wrote this article, on homeless men. And he talked about this issue with men and dependency. Let me read you what he says. He says, to put it simply, men are neither supposed nor allowed to be dependent. They're expected to take care of others and themselves. And when they cannot or will not do it, then the assumption at the heart of the culture is that they are somehow less than men and therefore unworthy of help. An irony asserts itself. By being in need of help, men forfeit the right to it.
Wow, yeah.
So nailed it.
Just right down. Yes, he nailed it right down. If you are not independent, then you don't have any right to get help.
And look at it. I was just brought to mind an example. I've been rewatching. I saw the Band of Brothers series when it was first released, and I've been rewatching it. And each of these segments, they're talking to World War II veterans in between these segments about their experience. And one of them that I watched last night, I think it was episode 4. The man he was from a small town in Missouri. And when the war started, the men were just lined up to volunteer to go fight, and they were passionate about it. In his small town, there were 3 men who were declared 4F and ineligible for military service that killed themselves, just in a town of 10 or 12,000 people.
Amazing.
There is something wrong with the importance, especially in this day and age, the importance that we put on men's backs, that they must provide, they must protect, or they're just worthless. And it just really chaps my ass that we don't have an APA talking about that.
And guys, you have worth just in being you. That's it. That's it. You don't have to do jack or shit. You have worth in being you. Bill Gates could not buy another you. You're worth it. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
It is really astounding, what seems like a kind of conscious refusal to actually wrestle with these basic bedrock issues.
Yes.
I was reading an article on the BBC website from last year, I think, by a woman talking about the suicide of her brother. And she had since then, become interested in the fact of male suicide. And so, here was someone who was quite sympathetic to the fact that men are overwhelmingly the ones who kill themselves. And yet, at the end of the article, she came up with the knee-jerk feminist kinds of responses, saying that, what are we going to do about this? And the main one was that it was men's fault.
Yes.
She didn't phrase it in that way, but that was how it came out, that men don't ask for help. And men need to learn to not be so stoic, and men need to learn to talk about their feelings more, and we need to tell men that it's okay to cry, and all of these things that, she was, I felt sorry for her in a way, because she was so desperate. She even mentioned that one of the major things that could be done in society was to put up more barriers on bridges and places where men kill themselves, so to prevent them. I guess it's true that you don't want to make it easy for somebody to jump off a bridge, but the idea that that is going to stop somebody who has got to the point in his life where he despairs and he feels he's worthless and he's determined to end it all, that he's not going to do it because, there's a barrier on a bridge.
Yeah, we'll put up a barrier instead of talk about the problems that got him there, honestly.
And to understand why.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and she was just at a loss, and it was obvious that she'd read all sorts of things written from this kind of gynocentric perspective, and so the best thing she could come up with were this barrier idea and the notion that men just need to be made more feminine. They need to learn to cry, and that's going to somehow...
And you get that on the other side too, Janice, from traditionalists. And I'm really happy for traditionalist women who speak up about men's issues, but there is a lot of them that reveal a great deal of cluelessness about men's issues in the end, because I've seen them say, I miss the days that men took care of me. And I want men back on the top of that white horse. In other words, I'm ready for them to live on that path that leads to suicide.
Yeah.
But they're willing to criticize feminists. I'm sorry, Cupcake, but you're not helping men.
Yeah. And neither side can really desire to help men. They don't have any understanding whatsoever. And the bottom line is that a man's pain is taboo. And that's their way to stay away from it. And when men realize that their pain is taboo, and almost every man realizes this, he's not going to run into the public square and start crying and emoting. So men know that their pain is taboo. They're not going to run out and start crying. No.
And if they do, it's a disaster for them, because
yes, it is.
Most people in their life then recoil.
Yes.
So it's just this hopeless thing where
we have to be independent. Whereas look at women's roles. Women can be independent, yay, or dependent. Oh, can you please do that for me? I can't do that today. Blah, 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 blah. And everyone, oh, okay, I'll do that. So she's got this flexibility between dependence and independence. The guy is locked into this independent side.
Yeah.
Can't move.
And it's hyper independence. It's not even just true independence.
Well, it's all based on the hierarchy. He's trying to be independent in order to raise up in the male hierarchy, which he's done from the time he was a little guy. And testosterone is there to push him into that. And it pushes to strive for status. So guys are pushed biologically to strive for status and to be more and more independent. And people don't get that. They don't understand it.
And unfortunately, with the gynocentrism in mind, it's also why, as a society, we're so willing to kick men when they're down.
Yes, he's not providing.
It's a pastime. Oh, he's a failure.
Yes.
He's no good, so you can treat him however you want.
Yep.
And people honestly show a lot of moral bankruptcy in how they treat men who are down.
Yes.
We're living in to me, that's why we're having to do regarding men.
Yes.
Because there's so few people having these kinds of discussions.
I agree.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's a bad one. Yeah.
Yeah, and the whole thing with the latest research that came out about girls. Did you see that? They, they had this thing where they said, oh no, girls ages 10 to 14, their suicide rates are increasing faster than the boys.
Yeah.
The headlines, like everyone, oh no, what can we do? We need to think about what we can do to help girls. What they didn't tell you is that even with this increase, the girls in that age range are still twice as likely, or less than, the boys are twice as likely to commit suicide as the girls.
Yeah.
Twice as likely, and no one says bull about the boys. You know, it's all about the girls. Gynocentrism on steroids.
And to be honest, all gynocentrism is on steroids in this culture. Now,
Yes.
Feminism counts on gynocentrism, or it would not exist.
Exactly.
Traditionalism counts on gynocentrism, or it would not exist.
Exactly.
Every narrative we have out there, except a precious few, hinges on women first and women onlys.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ladies first. And if you Google ladies first, the images, you'll get a boatload of images about ladies first, women first, la, 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 over and over and over and over again. Then Google men first, see what happens.
Nothing.
Nothing, baby.
No.
Nothing, mama.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy place.
Yeah.
So, do we have awards that we want to give out? Are we done here, or should we do, where are we at in this discussion?
We're done? That's good enough.
Give out our awards.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, who does the puta go to? The flying puta, that is.
Oh, Paul, who did we say the puta was going to go to today?
I think it went to gynocentrism.
Yeah, Ms. Gynocentrism.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you look underneath all this, the main culprit is gynocentrism. People are just reacting automatically. They're doing what they think is the right thing to do, but they're driven by this gynocentric thing that's there, that's driving them, that they don't even see. You know, it reminds me of racism in the 1940s and 50s. You know, it was there, but we really didn't have the name and the handle for it that we have now. We can look back and go, oh, look at that racism. Oh, that was terrible, blah, 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 blah. But at the moment, at that time, I don't think we had that same kind of consciousness about the racism. I think the same thing's happening now with gynocentrism.
Oh, absolutely, because we can look back now at a picture of over a water fountain that says white only,
right,
and be absolutely
astounded.
How could we have ever had that culture?
Precisely.
But then you see a women's only train car, and people go, "Oh, of course."
That's the way it is. Of course, you do that for ladies.
The only difference is, I would say that the victims of racism always knew it was wrong, whereas the victims of gynocentrism often are its most vigorous and enthusiastic supporters. So it's an even more knotty or tangled problem, I think.
Yes, it's interesting. And the people who could sympathize and empathize with the victims were the ones who started the whole thing about race, you know, changing things over. It's interesting, Janice, along with, of course, the people who were victims. The same thing's happening today with men, isn't it? You know, it's like there are some people like Janice, you know, who are sympathetic with what she sees, you know. She's able to see that this gynocentric thing is eating people alive. So, and Paul and I are starting to see it too, you know, we're all seeing it.
You're just starting to.
It's pretty deep. It goes deep. Gynocentric and silent, and it runs deep.
After 25 years, I mean, solid 25 years of personal work and study and everything you could imagine being involved in these issues, I still have to confront my own gynocentrism.
Yes, yes. It's there. It's very difficult.
Maybe we should have 12-step groups. We could all stand up and say, I'm Janice Fiamengo and I'm a recovering gynocentric.
I'll tell you what. I think at this point it qualifies as a mental illness. So why not?
It could be fascinating. Actually, seriously,
interesting.
It could be pretty interesting.
Interesting idea. 12-step.
Yeah.
GA.
We'll work on it. So who gets the humanitarian award?
Who are we giving our humanitarian award to? Well, you wanted to do it, Paul, didn't you? to talk about Earl Silberman.
Yes. God, it slipped my mind for a moment. Sorry, folks, senior moment there. Earl Silberman, sadly, is a victim of suicide, but he did spend his life and in constant struggle trying to provide men an alternative from going down that road.
Yes.
He tried to reach men in trouble, men who were being abused, that were locked into abusive relationships without a place to escape to. And of course, the Canadian psychological establishment and establishment of domestic violence industry pretty much just crapped on him and humiliated him for his efforts. The government did nothing for him. He eventually got despondent and took his own life in hopes that it would make a difference, that it might call attention to the problem. Unfortunately, and I gotta say this, while I respected his work very much, I wish he had stayed alive and kept fighting. I really do.
Yep.
Because like Tom said, you get one shot at this. This is your life. Take it or leave it. And we're all going to end up dead. So why not see it through to the end and see what you can do to make the world better? Earl did a lot of that. So for that, we give him the humanitarian award.
Yes. And he was a worthy fellow,
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
And he was Canadian.
Indeed he was. That's exactly right. And I'm going to leave a link below to a report I wrote for the state of Maryland when I was the vice chair of the Commission for Men's Health in Maryland. I wrote a report on men and suicide, and I'll leave a link to it below. It's
Excellent.
It sums up a lot of what we've talked about today.
I'm sure the government took action on it immediately.
Paul, I wrote 3 of those reports. I don't think anybody read them ever. They didn't give 2 shits. It's sad, but true. I wish they had read them. There's a number of things we could talk about. The Suicide Commission for Maryland is another piece of all this. And I tried to get involved with them and tried to encourage them to make their yearly conference about men. Because 80% of men are suicide victims, why not 80% of the conference be about men?
There's no money in men.
They didn't like that. And they said, well, why don't you do a
money is
workshop?
in
I said,
women.
okay, I'll do a workshop. And I did. And of course, they put me in the back and, the one of 6 people and blah, blah, blah. But oh, well. So that's gynocentrism. See, they're thinking not in terms of what helps men. They're thinking in terms of, the gynocentric mold that everything looks for, Ugh.
It's amazing. I had an email just the other day from a woman who's very interested in male suicide, and she mentioned that she's been corresponding with an organization called the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention,
yes.
if I'm remembering correctly, and she's gone back and forth with them because all of the images that they use on their website, they're overwhelmingly female images.
Yes.
So, even a man looking at that website that's dedicated to suicide prevention sees this is a gynocentric space.
Yes.
She's been pleading with them to put some men on there.
Bless her heart. I've been saying the same things now for many years to all of these places, including this place, and they won't listen because there was a time, this was maybe 5-10 years ago, when these suicide places, suicide prevention wouldn't even mention men. They wouldn't even mention them. Hell, the 2001 government report, it's like 300 pages about suicide and what we can do to prevent suicide, didn't even mention men. I think it was one sidebar and one little page. It's like, it's really an epidemic in not looking at the pain of men. It's amazing.
Well, and the society is so, and this is why I wasn't balking at all at the idea of looking at gynocentrism these days as a mental illness.
Yeah.
There's no money. You can show a picture of a man that's been burned with cigarettes and hit in the face until he's cut and bleeding, and ask people to raise money for him, and you'll have a negative balance on your efforts.
Sad but true.
Show a woman with a little smudge on her cheek, and people will throw money at it. That's how unbalanced we are And I don't know if we ever can do anything about it, but it's one of the reasons I do what I do, is because I love the idea of at least creating an intellectual refuge for men to
And
see
awareness.
themselves differently, and to know that the world is fucked up.
Yes.
It's not
Exactly.
them.
Yes.
That's it.
A woman's pain is a
Absolutely.
call to action. A man's pain is taboo. It's as
Yep.
simple as that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's totally messed up. Amazing. Yeah.
So, guys, you have worth. And we have a newsletter coming out.
Yes,
Mhm.
we do.
And
Why
if
don't
you
you
want to
tell them
sign
about
up
it,
for our
Tom?
newsletter, you should go to regardingmen.com and you'll get a little pop-up, or it'll be in the sidebar there, and we'll put a link below. And we wanted to do that specifically so that if we ever get axed from YouTube, you'll have contact with us and we'll have contact with you. And you'll look at if you look at the sign up, you'll see there it's also notifications. If you want to be notified for each video from our different channels, you can do that too, or you can just have the newsletter, which will be a fairly low level newsletter, maybe 4 months, something like that, I would guess. So sign up, come and see us.
Yep. And we do already have a lot of people signing up just from stumbling
Man.
across the site. So don't hesitate, get over there, sign up. We'll stay in touch. Oh, and if you sub to our channels and you notice that subbing and ringing the bell has not gotten you your notices, this will. You'll get a notice every time any one of the 3 channels releases a video.
Yes.
You'll
You
get
can
it right
choose
away.
which channel you want to be notified for, all, none, or some, so it's up to you. Good.
And with that,
Are we finished?
I think we're done.
That's it.
Men are good.
Yeah, they are.
They
Men
are
good.
indeed.
As is Janice and Paul.
And you, Tom.
Very good.
Yeah, no, not golden.
Leave him out.
Golden's all right.
Leave him out of it. All right. Y'all take care. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.